The greatest business opportunity anywhere in the world today is in customer service.
Nobody does due diligence. Like they don't it's just like this hope and a dream. And like you said, they just shut down their brains. I just can't understand it.
I'm a great believer in the power of the markets. Like-minded companies end up competing with each other.
We inevitably end up building golden cages around ourselves. And so we just build we should be fearful of all of our dreams coming true in a way.
I saw piracy kill my industry of the music industry. It's coming to sport.
Everything is just like they're late to the game of like piracy took over media first, right? And just like the media companies were trying to grab at the last straws and like trying to increase their profit margins, which killed them even faster. You see it in the film industry now. You see it like in sports.
In American sport, the people who will drop 90 are the media companies that invested in these rights. In Europe, the people that will drop 90 are the leagues because the media companies have only got 3-4 year deals. By the way, I mean, maybe you guys know this, but bushes are huge.
Hey, you're watching Just Press Record on the Cultish Creative YouTube channel. I'm your host, Matt Zeigler, and on each episode, I invite not one, but two guests to join me for a conversation-style interview. These are smart, funny, usually a little eccentric, frequently a little weird, often very online friends of mine, and even if you don't understand what they have in common at first, just wait, because I've seen some common ground between them that I've been dying to ask them about, and just press record. The show practically named itself, seriously. So subscribe, like, comment below, and stick around at the end of the disclosures, disclaimers, and reminders, and, come find me, cultishcreative.com, at cultishcreative on Twitter, and by name on LinkedIn. Without further ado, throw your seatbelts on. Let's make it a record. Okay, I am pressing record now. You are watching Just Press Record right here on the Cultish Creative YouTube channel. These guests, they know of each other, but they've never officially met. We are going to play with making the network work if we ever have before. I'm going to make the introductions. First guest, he is the Albie Shore of vol trading pleasure. Cool as an ice cube. And you can new jack swing on his, never mind that part, we're going to leave it out. It's all Pirates of Finance talk with no Vaseline and certainly no parroting of macro pontifications. Mr. Mutiny of FinTwit toxicity avenging, so close to coming straight out of Conshohocken, it's not even funny. One-time roommate to U.S. soccer royalty, turned other-time rug seller to Turkish tourists, turned real estate magnate, turned volatility hedge fund guy, and I can't resist, move over Black Moon. You can click your ruby red boot camp heels together because you're not in Napa anymore and you certainly can't hedge this buckshot. Mr. Jason Buck, welcome to the show.
Matt, always an honor. The intros are just spectacular. I'm chopping them up and I'm just using them in perpetuity as my hype man, but I'm more looking forward to Roger's introduction now.
We're gonna have some fun with this. Are you looking forward to it, Raj? Because I have a good one.
I cannot imagine.
You don't have any Albie Shore references, but I will say I've played a lot of Albie Shore on the getting ready this morning for this one, and plenty of Ice Cube for you, in your honor. So the second guest, can't spoil this, the Albuquerque of sports, and for you non-Italians, that means New Dawn and no average American listeners, not the dish soap. And yes, I did have to Google that to find out what it meant. But he's all in, and I don't mean as in the lake as it gets. I mean, there's no time to remember when we were not kings, because he's been busy writing some of the best art plus culture plus markets work I've come across in the past several years. Really, and I want to say, especially in this book, Sports Perfect Storms, he's kind of the Forrest Gump of fourth turnings. He's a mid to late 90s EMI music executive, turned Scottish football CEO and commissioner, turned critic and consultant to his, yes, as a matter of fact, I am very entertained fans around the world, and I can't resist because somebody's surely going to get their head kicked in tonight, right? I mean, when do I get to make a Rizzios reference in the intro to a podcast without somebody who might actually get it? Move over John Paul Mitchell Systems for gloriously shining hair commercials. We've got the simplest mind here at this breakfast club, and that's an embedded compliment if ever there was one. Mr. Roger Paul Mitchell himself. Welcome to the show, Roger.
Lovely to be here. There's some great stuff in there. Very, very nice Easter eggs there. Not everybody will get them. Breakfast Club is fantastic. Very good.
I had to stop in the book, this is months ago, and I got the copy and say to my wife, do you know who's in this intro? Do you recognize this name? Huge Simple Minds fan. So I'll give that the shout out. I want to go back. Start me here. So much for us to talk about. 1998. Jason, I'm asking you first. Us youngins, and especially me. I was still in high school in 1998. Where were you in 1998, Jason?
I was in my freshman or sophomore year of university. I'm in
Okay.
Charleston, South Carolina. Yeah, playing for College of Charleston, and yeah, I was like, I think I graduated from IMG in '97, and so yeah, and I took a year off though before I went to school. So I probably my '98-ish would be my freshman year in university.
So you're straight into college, out of the IMG Academy, doing that thing. And Roger, you had, and again, this is for people. I'm plugging this book. You want to get
Thank
a
you.
copy of this book. Lots and lots of footnotes in this thing. 1998, you were going through a little bit of a career change, I think, right? What was going on with you?
Well, the funny thing was, I don't know how much time we've got to kind of like go meander down the road. I was
People
working.
got to know.
All
They
the
gotta
time.
Yeah.
know.
All
Well, it's a longish story and it's a good lesson. I was working in Virgin Music, which was part of the EMI group, as you said, in Italy, and those were the last great years of the music industry. And we were having a particularly good 2 or 3 years in Italy, such that the group thought that it was time for me to move to a bigger market. That's the way it happens at corporates. And they said that I needed to go to France to do EMI France, which is a much bigger music market. And that really worked for me because my wife was working at Philip Morris, and she could, because they liked her a lot, she could basically go where she wanted to go, and she would have gone to Philip Morris Paris, and we would have been, a young couple with no kids yet in Paris at that time of our life. To cut a long story short, the CEO of EMI France really liked me and made this beautifully charming speech where he said, I'm going to choose a French woman instead, one because she's a woman and one because she's French, and we don't like working with foreigners. It was something like that, but it was very, very charming, and I almost felt he was doing me a favor. But I was really, really annoyed because we'd done a lot of work to get that going together. And that couple of weeks later, I saw an advert in the newspaper for the new commissioner CEO of a Challenger League, Scottish Premier League, which was a copy of what the English Premier League had done 6 years earlier. This is in soccer. I'll use the word soccer in this podcast, which is basically the top end of football in Scotland, breaking away the top 12 clubs. So I replied to that ad, and just out of curiosity and a little bit of anger. And before I knew it, I was in a process that I couldn't stop. And they appealed to the ego. I wasn't sure I wanted to move back to Scotland. I had moved away from Scotland at 21 with quite a light heart. I'd moved to Italy and enjoyed it a lot. I'd been in London a bit. Wasn't sure I wanted to go back to Scotland, but soccer is soccer. And I'd always been writing about soccer as a hobby, and that was quite funny because it went very well. It was a coffee break hobby, and before I knew it, they were asking to see my tapes at Channel 4 and everything. So it was quite funny. So I got the job, and my wife and I decided that we were going to go for it. We went back to Scotland, and we got married, we started a family, and I stayed there for a right cycle. And that was my introduction to sport. I guess like anything in sport, nothing is linear, nothing is planned. It's just you get in, hopefully, and you get out alive, and everything else is a bit of a blur, to be honest. That's what happened in '98.
Amazing. Jason, who was your team? Did you have a European team you were pulling for in 98 yet?
Well, like you and I have talked about before, it was always like VHS tapes and everything till then. Like that was hard. That was just when like Champions League was starting to get shown in the US. So I'm trying to remember, it's probably more like those AC Milan teams of like the late 90s. Those were like great times to watch. It was just like what you could actually get on television was incredibly difficult. And I remember my coach at the time at university he came from like baseball and was like a former Marine, like, so we didn't get along well. And I remember like Adidas was coming to like do our sponsorship or something, and they had like a name of the boots for like San Siro or something like that. He had no idea what that was. And so I was just like, what are we doing here? Like, this just makes no sense to me.
What was it like knowing that you're taking this little thing? Because I feel like, Roger, you got this in the music industry, and you write about this a lot, like taking something that is small scene art and turning it into something even just a little bit more commercial. Will you talk about what the draw was to throw
Well-
yourself into that right cycle?
Well, I'd have to say something, and this is true of almost every sports market in the world. In that market, it's not small. It is everything.
Oh no, it's life.
It's everything.
It's life.
So
itself.
especially in Scotland, most people won't know this, but the soccer scene in Scotland is much more social than it is just sporting. It represents at the level of Glasgow Celtic and Glasgow Rangers, the two rivals, a whole 1,000-year history of religious sectarianism in the UK. Celtic is the Catholic team from Irish immigrants, and Rangers is the establishment Protestant team loyal to the British Crown. It might sound a little bit melodramatic, but that's actually the truth. So even though I'd grown up in Glasgow, and I should know this, I didn't realise how much it was until I actually get in that job. And over those 4 years, I saw some stuff that you wouldn't believe. Mainly from the fans of my team. I'm a Celtic man. They were dramatic, and like there's no way that you can reason with sports fans, especially not ones that are living out, battles in fields around kings and Jacobites and everything like that, rerunning all of that. So I think this is the same as anybody in sport, certainly in soccer in in Europe. You find yourself in a world that you didn't expect, and then you see if you can swim or sink.
Roger, related to that, like I was a comparative religions major in university, and so I'm fascinated. And I love comparative religions, almost for like what you just said, for like Celtics versus Rangers. It encompasses everything, right? Like you have entire histories, you have faith, you have art, you have culture. Everything's kind of wrapped up in there. So as like a lover of history, it was like a great way to kind of study all those things. But I couldn't agree with you more, especially Celtic Rangers is like one of the best derbies in the world, right? Like that amount of vitriol or faith or hatred or whatever is truly fascinating. There's nothing I enjoy more than taking an American to a European soccer match for the first time, because there's nothing like it quite in American sports. And the amount of like all of that goes into it. But like also like Matt's like saying is like the taking a small idea or culture or art. Like I think you've talked about this before, but the way I always think about it is like, how do you differentiate now is like almost those clubs that were trying to break away for like Super League, right? Like you have the commercialization of like the English Premier League and maybe some of the other top flight clubs. But you talk about all the time is like anything below that is a community asset and should be treated as such. But trying to like, to me, as I'm talking to these owners all the time, they're looking for investment. They're trying to cross that chasm, right? They're trying to be like a third division, like a League 2 club or a League 1 club. And they think that their aspiration is to keep getting promotion and everything. And I'm like, no, why not try to run a good business that's part of the fabric of the local community? But they can't help themselves now with maybe like the Wrexhams of this world, these dreams of making it to the Premier League. But like, that's what maybe Matt was hinting at, is like, how do you think about that bifurcation of this world now? Like maybe they don't want to accept that the Premier League's high-end entertainment that's competing with Netflix. And then now you're a local club that's like a religious institution.
There's a lot to unpack there. Where to start? The thing about, I don't know if you agree, Jason, the thing about people coming into soccer, and it probably applies to all sports, including American sports, is that no matter how disciplined they have been in their other career, they could have been Warren Buffett-esque in terms of Charlie Munger, even better, not missing a beat. And they buy a football, a soccer club, a baseball club. It takes them a matter of weeks before they lose their shit about what's going on. They are at that point being driven by emotions, their own emotions. And if they are stronger, they will hold out a little bit until the fans' emotions overwhelm them. They will have to react to a tribe, a mob, a pack of people shouting at them, demanding things, calling them the most horrendous insults that they will have never experienced in their life, never experienced. And they will then have to look themselves in the mirror and say, how am I going to react to this? And in the main, they cede to what the fans want, which ultimately is more players, get us up, if you spend a little bit more, we're only 2 players away from getting promotion or the Champions League. And you just look back. I saw them all doing it. I saw them all doing it in my league. They say, yeah, the fans are right. And they do it. And 9 out of 10, it doesn't work because there's only one that gets relegated or two. You take the point. And most of those investments end up at your P&L income statement as red ink. So managing in sports, especially in Europe, where we don't have cost controls, we don't have union deals, we don't have inbuilt marginality that comes from all of that. You are in the management of what I like to call the management of the asylum. It only takes one madman to take you all into the asylum. And then you're there, and then good luck, my friend. Good luck with that. And, we were joking off mic before we started about Simon Hallett at Plymouth. Now, Simon, I would say, is one of those very disciplined ones. He gets sucked in. He hired Wayne Rooney. There is no way. I think I did that on a podcast. There's no way somebody like Simon Hallett would hire somebody like Wayne Rooney in any other of his businesses. No way. No way. That's sport. And that's the beauty of it. That's why, the book talks about how you find the balance there. How do you manage? It's the same in the music business. How do you manage an artist who says, look, I know you've got my release of an album in this calendar year, and that's going to be part of the reported results for a listed company, a PLC. But you know what? I can't be bothered. I've just broken up with my woman and I'm off. Bye-bye. And the whole thing of this book is a version of all my stories that I saw in this journey. One of the things that's very interesting is that the very top boss of EMI, a chap called Ken Berry, an Englishman, a true English gentleman, he was the partner of Richard Branson in founding Virgin Music. He would have been the sane one to Richard's ebullient volcano, everything that Richard is. So Ken made a lot of money when Virgin was sold to EMI. Richard went to do airplanes and airlines, and Ken stayed on, and he ended up being in charge of EMI PLC. The whole shooting match, because he'd had some great years at Virgin. He broke the Spice Girls, he broke Backstreet Boys, Verve. Just like I said, the years I was there, it was gold, and anything we touched, it just went bang, 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 bang. And then that's what happens in the listed markets. There's so many things we could talk about here. The problem with the listed markets in the creative industries is if you have a boom year, that's your new bar. That's your new bar. So you then, if you're being a company that needs to show growth every year, you have to beat that, which means you have to increase your risk. He did something which most people didn't think was very risky. He made a big deal with Mariah Carey. Signed her for a whole lot of money. This was peak Mariah Carey. After she signed, she had a nervous breakdown. Glitterball, I think that was the name of the album, was an absolute disaster. Ken's career was over. Now, so a guy who's been perfect all through his career does something that you would need to do to keep the trend going, and it cost him his career. So that's why the book tries to go through all of these things and say, managing in the creative industries of art, music, even publishing, advertising, certainly sport, is blooming hard. And I find it fascinating to see how the people that end up owning these assets deal with this pressure and this change. And that's the story, really, isn't it? That's the story.
Then, Matt, I know this is catnip for you when he's talking about music and everything, but I'm just going to interrupt and interject because I want to take the opportunity to really dive into some of the nuances that Roger pulled out there. By the way, his book, The Perfect Storm, is like the perfect anecdote if you want to buy a sports team, especially any sort of soccer club in the world. Like, it's a perfect bucket of cold water to make you realize like what you're up against. So I highly recommend the book. But like you're saying, like Simon as an example, like he's starting a foundation for the science of decision-making theory, right? With the traders at Susquehanna, so the best probabilistic thinkers in the world, right? And then when you start owning a club, right, it's hard to not lose your mind. And Simon did say one thing to me that I loved the other day. It was like, if we ever did get promoted to the Premier League, I'm taking that parachute payment and I'm just putting it right into the club's coffers. We're not upping wages or anything. We're going right back down, but we're going to get, 120 million pounds going right into our savings account. And I was like, that's great. But as you know all too well, it's like, I think the worst one is when people get into the championship, right? Like everybody loves promotion. They want to get in the championship. And then most championship clubs in the UK, which is the second division for people that don't know, like they typically lose 30 million pounds a year trying to make that promotion to that golden ticket of those parachute payments you get from getting in the Premier League. So it's like almost the toughest club in the world, like the toughest league in the world. And it's just a graveyard of people like losing money. And so I always wonder, it's like, as a community asset, right? Like, League Two, mid-table mediocrity, that sounds great to me. Like, as long as I'm running profitably and like I'm part of the fabric of the community, but I'm saying we can't help ourselves. So what do you think happens? Like, as more I talk to these clubs and they're looking for investment and everything, like you said, I cannot believe, especially the Americans, the clubs they're buying into, the money they're putting into this, the money they're just lighting on fire. Like, why did people do this? It's like, nobody does due diligence. Like, they don't, like, it's just like this hope and a dream. And like you said, they just shut down their brains. I just can't understand it.
Well, again, an awful lot to unpack there. And the Sunday column I did this week, do you guys know Jawad Mayan, Grant's friend?
Yep.
Well, it's on Jawad. Well, actually, he's the excuse for me to talk about other things about the finance world, which is the difference between valuation by fundamentals and the valuation by wall of money. And, we're in the latter. That's the answer to your question. There's just an awful lot of people, and let's put them into three categories. There's ones that are what I call rich guys that want to get something that money can't buy, fame and legacy. There's just enough of them now to be bidding up assets. The second one is financial funds. They want to spend the money they've raised from LPs before they have to give it back. So they're desperate to deploy, and they probably close an eye to due diligence. Certainly they won't use people like me because I'll tell them the truth, and they will say, well, actually, we want to deploy anyway. It'll be all fine. And if it isn't all fine, we'll have had a continuation fund, and I'll be 15 years from now on a beach, and somebody else will have to pick up the pieces of the bad investment. Sorry, that's a bit of a rant on PE in general, but anyway. And the third one is sovereign wealth, people that are buying into assets for all kinds of geopolitical reasons. It's that's the reason why it's happening. Then I would question what their particular investment thesis is. To your point, Jason, the investment thesis that you hear very often, especially from Americans, is, as you say, buy a championship club. The valuations are pretty low. All you have to do is westernize it. I've heard that. Americans come to Europe and say, all we need to do is westernize an Italian club and we'll be fine. Americans have got this idea that we don't know what sports marketing is. It's just different here. We've got open leagues. We don't have the luxury of everything you've got to take your time and market with a 3-year, 4-year time span. In 4 years, we could all be dead in Division X or whatever it is. So, they're coming in with the championship and they say, if we just get things right and we know about Billy Bean and we know about Moneyball and we know how to recruit and we know how to market and we know how to engage that fan base, nobody else does, and we'll get up and then happy days, we'll get an immediate convergence, uplift on valuation getting into the Premiership, and we're away. In the main, for the reason you said, that's an investment thesis about going on black and red, except that there's only 2 blacks and there's 14 reds. It's insanity, because if everybody's doing that...
And the red's your balance sheet most of the time, right?
Whereas there are other theses, which is, I think, what you're alluding to. If you find a club in the main where the fan base hasn't got expectations above its station, I like that phrase, expectations above their station, then you can buy that. You can run it better. There are marginal gains to be had both on the field and off the field. And you can hopefully, and this is a thing what Simon's done a little bit until the Wayne Rooney I don't, lapsus, let's call it a lapsus. I think that's what Simon's been doing at Plymouth. You can gradually move your way up. It's the kind of like Atalanta, Udinese type model, if you talk about Italy, where your fan base isn't going to give you a hard time if you don't get into the Champions League. They've got zero expectations. You've got no pressure on your back. So when people come to me and say, what should I buy in sport in Euro? I say to them, what's your investment thesis? If they say the one about championship promotion, I say, I'm not your guy. If they say, I believe in community, I believe that sport is the only anecdote left for a lot of the wrongs in our society, whether it's kids being locked in a room on a screen, getting into a world of loneliness and digital lives, whereas sport takes them into an open-air field. It takes them into a dressing room where they understand what a team is, where they understand what sacrifice for a common objective is. They learn the lessons of life. That's very positive because participation is then the real key to fandom. Any other of these fan engagement techniques, I believe, are a bit transient. You'll get the kids for now, but the kids are so fickle now. They'll come in and out. But if you've played lacrosse, if you've played rugby, if you've played baseball even, you've got a chance of being a real fan. So, investment thesis. Plymouth Argyle, when he took it over, basket case of a club, I'll buy it for nothing. I'll just be patient. I'll do all my stuff. I'll get all the people in and it'll be a community asset. I'll feel good about it. I'm a rich man already. I don't need the money. I'm doing a lot of good. And then if, by the way, we're really, really competent and we get promoted, happy days, And then coming back to you, say if he gets into the Premiership, he just keeps the parachute payment. You know what we say in Glasgow about that, Jason? Make sure you know the time of the last bus because they will come for you. They will come for you
Of course,
under
it
your
sounds good
house.
theory.
Yes. That's good theory. They will find out where you live and they will wait. That's what happened in Roma recently. Roma, which is owned by Americans, freaking. It was previously owned by another American, Jim Punnell, another common friend of this group. Yeah. So Roma is one of the hardest club assets in the world for all the reasons. For people, I think, forget what Rome is. Rome had the Colosseum and the circuses and the palaces when all of us were all still in caves. Rome is a city that is beyond what anything we can think about just now. It's got much more history and DNA than any of us. So you can't manage that really easily. So Friedkin buys it and he brings in this Italian guy to replace Mourinho, Daniele De Rossi, and a really legend player of Roma, who's doing relatively well. He then brings in a chief executive, a woman, a well-qualified woman, came from a good background. She came from Greek football. She also was a lawyer that worked in sports governance as CEO. For whatever reason, she sacks Daniele De Rossi. Maybe she's right, maybe she's not important. 2 or 3 weeks later, she leaves by, quotes, mutual consent. And the stories come out. The reason that she's left is because there's people turning up at the school of her kids, pretending to be uncles and aunts to kidnap the children. I mean, I'm not joking here. This is fandom. This is in European football. And you can have every plan you want, but to quote the glorious, still glorious despite everything, Mike Tyson, everybody's got a plan until they get a punch in the nose. And that is European soccer, rugby assets, everything like that. Sorry, that was a long answer to.
No, it's perfect because there's so many. There's even more. There's always going to be even more threads to pull on. I was actually able to dig up. It's always hard to find this stuff in the U.S., but about a year ago, I was able to dig up some of the episodes on the documentary they did on Como before, when they were first starting to turn over Como FC and everything. And what was amazing about the documentary made me think about you a lot. One, because obviously like the lake, but two is because they were coming up to the bus or coach after the match and pulling the players and the coach and the manager off the bus to the fans were talking to them. They didn't have shirts on. They're just sitting there with their beer guts, yelling at the players and wanting all their respect. And it was right. The things that you always hit on is I don't think American owners can realize the amount of criticism that you would get from the local fan base of a hometown club that's been around for 100 years. And it's just like almost impossible to deal with or to even think about. And I always think about it actually is like, speaking of when Matt brought up like the late 90s and like watching AC Milan or watching Serie A when it was when it was at its height in the late 90s, is I always think about socially as a global citizen. I always think that it's a good harbinger of where we are as a society. Is like, I think it's just a matter of time before they bring around the cages around the pitch like they used to have in the 80s and 90s, especially in like Italy and Argentina and stuff like that. And then like when you'd see like
hope
tennis
not.
players start to get
I
stabbed,
really
like just
hope
a matter of time, right? It's just like we wax
I
and
hope
wane.
not.
I hope not too, but like that's when we know we're in a tough spot when those cages come back around the pitch.
Let's hope we don't go back to pure hooliganism in that form. Refs escaping like a cage match out of the stadiums. I don't need to see any of those highlights ever again. Jason, I'm curious what you think about just like the locality of the feedback. And I'm thinking about your time in real estate in the restaurant business and that industry and stuff like that, where you have, it strikes me, and I think about this a lot as a 80s and 90s kid, the ability to go on social media and shout out the manager is not showing up at the kid's school or at the coach's school to kidnap the kids. There's something about direct community on community feedback that can both lead to a community asset that's thriving and also lead to one that becomes, modern phrase, becomes completely toxic or gets abstracted and turned into something toxic. How do you think about that balance between local fans and that relationship with an asset?
God, there's so many things in there. Let me see if I can remember them all. One is like, what we've been hinting at with like Plymouth Argyle clubs like that. One, I love clubs that are like a single club town or they have a large catchment area, those kind of things. Is like that way you can really galvanize the community that way. And then like, once again, it's more of a community asset. And I think it's really interesting. Those lower league clubs is like your P&L is entirely driven by match day revenue in the community, right? And then as soon as you get to like the Premiership or the top league clubs, now it's driven by TV rights and the cascade of payments. So it's like, it's two entirely different businesses. And I don't think people realize that too. It's like, it's an odd shift. And I always think at like the highest level, I love what like Arthur Blank did at the Atlanta Falcons is like, he put a cap on beers and hot dogs because he didn't want to gouge the fans at the stadium because he knows 90% of his income is coming from the TV rights. It's not coming from match day revenue. So might as well make the fans happy a little bit, in that sense.
And look at the turnout he got when he did it.
Exactly.
I mean, those numbers are stupid.
Yeah, it's amazing. So like, I always wonder too, obviously you can't, I always think about these weird things like just like match day atmosphere. I'm fascinated by stadiums and clubs like Borussia Dortmund, right? They have that huge yellow wall. Now, obviously you can't do that in England anymore with the terrace rules from like the Hillsborough disaster. But like, there's got to be ways that you make that on-camera experience or the actual in-game experience so good for the fans that it permeates when people are watching the game. And one of the things I don't think anybody talks about is like, I always think about where the camera is set up. At what level is the camera set up? Because like on a Saturday, if I'm watching the Premiership in the morning and I have 10 choices of games to watch, I'm going to flip through to find the right camera angle because it changes the dynamics of the game. But I don't think anybody's thinking about like, they haven't innovated on any of that since like Sky Sports bought the Premiership was in 93, right? Like, but now you have these things with like Cosm, like the sphere, like experiences of shared reality. And now we're going to have goggles. Like you have to really think about where you're going to put those cameras because that's going to change the excitement and that experience. And like when you're too high up, it's like, it doesn't vibrate with you. But I'm coming back to your thing, Matt, is like, I really wonder, like, so related to restaurants, right? What's so tough about the restaurant business is you're only as good as your last dish, right? And you are getting intimate feedback from every single diner in that restaurant on every single dish they have. You do one bad dish, you get one person food poisoning, and that's the wrong person. It cascades through and you're out of business. It's what makes the restaurant industry so entirely difficult. But the other interesting thing about the restaurant industry is what's really hard at the high-end level at the Michelin-starred restaurants is, you become a great chef because you really want to serve people, nourish their soul, show your art, everything. But if you build that restaurant, you're going to have people to come work in your restaurant in the back of the house, those other cooks, they want to move up the ranks as well. And so now you have to open up another restaurant, right, to give them opportunities, right? And another. Next thing you know, you're running this, 10 to 20 restaurant empire, and you no longer cook anymore. You're totally out of touch with the clientele. It's this weird dynamic that happens there. And I think that happens a lot, even as owners in soccer, for example. And like, it was almost touching on, the things Roger was saying that I find so interesting is like, the idea, the perfect example of what I think Roger's saying is like, as an American, you can have a different thesis, right? You can use all your Moneyball analytics and you can have a multi-club model idea. And let's use Redbird as an example, because that was also just reading and listening to stuff by Luke Bourne last night, who's one of the great like sports analysts, everything like that. But he was always very circumspect in that he said, we had this thesis, but like how many other dozens of Americans have the similar thesis, right? Of like, we're going to come in there, we're going to moneyball this thing, we're going to do the multi-club model, we can fix this. But more importantly, why I bring up Redbird too, as we all know, is like they bought AC Milan. And as Roger was referring to like AS Roma or AC Milan, like I always wonder, like I would never want to do business in Italy. So this goes back to Matt, what you're saying about that local dynamic, right? Like, and that's why I bring it back to like the chef. The chef that's working in a pass in an open kitchen has a direct connection to his clientele. Whereas these owners that are living, 6,000 miles away that never even show up to a game, they have no direct interaction. But that's goes both pro and con, as Roger's saying. Like you have to also be able to have the fortitude to go against them to try to build a profitable club or a break-even club. But also you have to be there to understand the local dynamics. Like, it on paper, it makes sense to buy a Roma or a Milan. But then when you try to get a new stadium built, you run into, Italian politics at a level you can never comprehend. So I'm just like, without boots on the ground or truly understanding that culture and heritage going back hundreds, if not thousands of years, it's always the dynamics of restaurants or any business. Like, how do you know the local flavor of that without proper local partners? And then now you run into a problem of like, how do you find proper local partners?
Well,
how do you think about that, Roger?
Respond. Well, I did the column about, Milan, the cardinal sin, which is obviously a play on words of Cardinale of Redbird.
Yeah.
There's a couple of things in there that I would want to comment on. One is a general one, and this is classic Buffett Munger. It is about your entry price of any investment, whether that's in Kenya or Copenhagen or Calabria. If you're not investing with a margin of safety, as Buffett would call it, you're not going to do well. So let's take that into the asset of AC Milan. AC Milan was ended up being owned by Elliott, which is the Singer family, Paul Singer, again, classically known by the finance community. He had a loan to the owner of Milan, who was a Chinese guy. I can't remember his name on it. The time China was investing, and now it pulled back, and he ran out of money, and Singer had a claim on the default. And they came to me at the time, because obviously I was here, and they said, the loan is worth 350 million. If we claim the club ownership 100%, as we're entitled to because they're in default, what can we aspire to do? And they asked me that, and I'm sure they asked many other people that as well. And I basically said to them, look, you're getting it at a great price. All you have to do is bring it back to mean, and it's worth at least double that. At least double that. You know what you need to clean up. You know that the roster is got a huge amount of old players that are very expensive. You just need to clean that up a little bit. You'll get some element of... And the guy that was at Singer at the time was a guy called Giorgio Furlani, who did all of that, and over the next 4 years did clean the club up. So they basically bought it at an entry price of 300 million or so, that would be euros, and they sold it to Jerry Cardinale for 1.2 billion. Now, it's the same asset. It's the same difficulties, Jason, about working in Italy, although that I think is overblown. It's just that it's harder, but you can do it. The point is this: Singer went through a risk analysis that said, I'm getting in at a very good price here, and I have got visibility of the wins that I can make to get this to a $607 million asset, and happy days, I've made a great return. He got the jackpot because some guy came along at the top of a bull market and paid 1.2 million. I believe Luke's in that organization. I ran into Luke in a previous life. And when he was at Toulouse, I think, which is also in the Redbird stable. So the lesson is not a sport one in this case. The lesson is classic finance, in my opinion, which is Anything's a good investment if you buy it at the right price with a good margin of safety. The problem of the sports industry today is that it's got bull market valuations for the three reasons I said before. Wall of money, rich guys that want legacy and fame, sovereign wealth bidders, and funds that don't want to give money back to LPs. That's driven away the margin of safety and some. So you have to be super, super good now to make a return on investing in sports assets in Europe. I'm talking about Europe. America's slightly different. And, that's why everybody that comes and says, should I buy? I want to get involved in women's football. Isn't it cool? It's got to be a winner. And I have the same conversation with them all the time. You want the truth, or you want the thing that allows you to tick a box and say, I'm good to go? I can give you both. Which one do you want?
I want to come back to the bull market and prices, because that was like the one maybe slight bone to pick I had with you about your book, or I want to go into the further nuances. But like, and I couldn't agree with you more. Like, I've been around soccer my whole life in America, right? I've seen all the leagues come and go. Like, I couldn't be more bearish on any of the leagues in the U.S. Like, it's always fake. Like, it's never going to really take off. Like, it's just, I mean, it's kind of nonsense. I mean, even look in America, it's like their TV ratings, it's like the 5th most watched league in the United States. Like, nobody actually watches those games on any of the streamers or television. You know, they've created a
certainly if Messi's not playing. If Messi's not playing, it's a joke.
Well, and that's all like our Latin immigrants too that are primarily watching that, right? Like if they've created an amazing, game day experience because people watch the Tifosi on YouTube and they mimic it in the US, but like it's kind of an alternative sport and probably always will be because there's always been kind of an upper middle class sport in the United States, right? Like it's never been a major sport. So we'll see.
But
I mean, I
the
hope that
Latins
changes.
may change that. I agree with you. But I agree with you. It is a Latin sport if it's going to become mainstream. That's the demographic for sure. I hope,
we had two demographics, right? We have Latin immigrants in America, and then we had the salute almost our service members in the military in Germany that went off base to like impregnate women in country in Europe. That's where we get all of our players, right? They come up from like the Bundesliga kind of youth system and everything. So those are our two primary things, right?
Yeah,
like it's
for players, yes, but for fans, I kind of agree with you. I don't see the working class man, because in the main it's still a man.
No.
The sports fan's still a man. I can't see the American working class man ever getting really, really solid on soccer in America. The Latino guys, yeah, Mexicans love football, soccer. And then you're right, it's soccer moms, like Eva Longoria, Angel FC. These are cultural things at the moment,
Right. Unfortunately, but I hope I'm wrong. I hope it all takes off. I hope I'm wrong, but I'm unfortunately right alongside you on like you've seen this come and go a million times almost.
Yeah. Like I say, there is a lot of money, and I've spoken to a lot of them, funds in America about women's soccer. There's a lot of money that wants to get into this desperately. And I just wonder what the dynamic has been, guys, because, have they gone to their LPs and said women's soccer and women's sport is the next big idea? Half of the population's been ignored. It must come. It's a winner. Just on the numbers alone, the LPs have said, knock yourself out. And they now say, well, where are the women's assets and sport that I want to buy? I've had people come on to me and say, where do I invest this money? That's a kind of like, that's a top-down way of doing stuff, and some investors like that. I'm much more a value guy at the bottom, like we mentioned earlier, Munger and Buffett and others like that, grassroots community.
Well, that whole like value distress. So speaking of that, like I was texting Matt the other day. I was like, my only play on like American soccer would be like to buy in minority interest in an MLS team right now, knowing it's just a 2-year play when all the hype cycles at the height during the 2026 World Cup and everything is to then just sell into that hype cycle. That would be the only play I see like there. That's still the, but like, so what you're saying about distress.
Go ahead. Sorry, on you go, Matt. Jason, sorry, on you go, there's a delay.
No, sorry, there's a bit of delay. So the way I think about like you were referencing is like, I always call it like, they call it sports washing, right? When it's a sovereign wealth fund and everything. But to me, it's all sports washing, right? Like whether it's another high net worth individual, whether it's a PE fund, all of this stuff like basically cleans up your name. The analogy I always use is like when I lived in Napa Valley, I called it surname laundering. So like I come from like a manufacturing family in the Midwest. You know, there's nothing wrong with those businesses or anything, but people make up a lot of money in manufacturing in like the Midwest. And then all of a sudden they move to Napa Valley, they buy a vineyard, they lose money on it, but now their grandkids can act like they're the patrician, like vignerons. And then so it's like a way to like wash their last name of this like commercialized background to now they're like these elegant, you know, multi-generational vineyard owners. And like the same thing happens in sports, right? These are trophy assets in a way. But like you're saying, what I can't figure out though is, yes, the only way to do this is in a value distressed asset way. And Elliott's obviously one of the best in the world, but it takes a certain kind of mentality to do the loan to own that Elliott does. Like that's a whole other a world that most people don't want to kind of dip their toe into. Like he's willing to fight crazy battles. But when the only way to do it is distressed assets, the hard part I find is, as you know, there's only a few of these assets that are like on the market at any given time, right? And there's more money chasing those assets. So how do these people have the discipline to wait? Like I've been looking at teams for a decade now, and I've only seen 2 or 3 that actually even piqued my interest. But then people came in and obviously overpaid. But like just waiting for distressed assets, like it just doesn't seem, when you're just trying to sports wash or surname launder, or like you said, the PE dynamics I'd love to get into of like, you got to put the money to work now. So you by nature have adverse selection. Isn't that the case always, or?
Yeah, a lot of that it makes sense. I would say something that takes us into something much more important about, I hate the word asset class, but let's use it. The asset class of sport. So the issue with the sports industry is that, as Matt mentioned earlier, we have gotten rich on the back of the media industry for 30 years, and then principally on the back of the cable bundle. For all those reasons, the value of sports rights has gone through the roof. We all know what's happening to the media sector. We don't need to be super deep media analysts to know that the cable bundle is dead, that piracy is active, that streaming as a model is very low margin compared to the very juicy margin of the cable bundle. The media sector is bouncing off the walls, whether it's Warner Brothers Discovery, whether it's Comcast, whether it's Disney or ESPN in there. I could keep going on. They don't know what they're doing to try and find a future for themselves. So our banker, the person that has made us rich, is going through a moment of existential crisis. And the sports industry goes along willy-nilly with every deck that I see that uses CAGR, C-A-G-R, compound annual growth rate of 6-7%. What world are they living in? Why can't they join the dots? The boom years of the media bid are over. Certainly, if you're not the NBA and the Premier League and Formula One and the IPL and in India, they're over. So here's your opportunity, Jason. You're right. There haven't been a lot of distressed assets that don't get priced away by the competition. But I'm telling you what, there's going to be a lot of them, because there's going to be a lot of sports leagues that are going to go no bid. The media companies are not interested in anything. They can't afford it beyond the ones that really move their needle. And they're called the NFL, they're called the NBA, baseball, maybe hockey, and all the international. If you're not in that, you're going to struggle. And then you're going to say, what's going on? And if you're well prepared as a fund, set yourself out for distressed lending, principally lending. I think you can make a lot of money in the next 10 years just because of that. At the end of a bull market, it's going to overcorrect the other way. You'll pick up assets for dimes on the dollar. And if you know what you're doing, that's what I'm preparing for. That's the next big thing in investing.
So this is the key piece there, I think. We don't disagree. I'm just not so certain of your premise that you had in the book that you talk about often on this, is in the sense that, like, so we specialize at our firm in like black swan hedging, right? And so everybody thinks I'm a perma bear, which I'm not. I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm an optimist by nature. And so like, I just know bad shit eventually happens, and that's why we try to hedge against that. But otherwise, what we also say at our firm is, because everybody comes to us for like black swan protection, we say beware the white moose. And what we define the white moose is when the market can be irrational longer, you could say solvent, right? By being scared and going to cash or black swans is like, you may miss on 3, 5, 10 years of a bull market. And so that's what I'm saying is maybe not so fast. Is like, I
Sure.
don't know. Like I'm looking at these and I think the nuance I think we're getting to is maybe super leagues versus like not as mainstream sports. But like, I think about like those media rights, like you said, they've exploded. Team valuations have exploded. But does that not mean it can go on for another decade and go higher? Like, we don't know what the next media rights is going to look like. I'm with you. Like, I just think trees don't grow to the sky. But I've been burned so many times thinking that, like,
I hear you,
the stock
Jason.
market can't keep going higher, or real estate can't keep, like in COVID, I've been around real estate my entire life.
I
COVID,
hear you.
I thought,
COVID is the great example.
I thought real estate was
COVID is the
done.
great example. Yeah, and
I was totally
what
wrong.
happened in the markets and so my view, like you're a vol guy, and like I love that. I love that stuff. I'm much more a kind of like value. Let's have a look at the operational line items. So if you look at American sport just now, almost all of the leagues have got long-term media deals in there. Almost all of them. So they're insured against anything that happens. Warner Brothers goes bust, Paramount goes bust. They're kind of insured a little bit in that because they've got their rights in there. That's not the case in Europe because we aren't allowed to do very long deals like 10-year deals. We can only do 3 or 4. And we've seen already in Europe, in Italy, in France, where the media rights values have come down dramatically. So what I believe is happening is that the American big finance money, the funds, the investors, the family offices, they see American sport and they say everything is rosy in the garden. What is not to like? Our media values go up. The last NBA contract was wonderful, great deal. Our costs are controlled. We've got built-in marginality. Give me a little minority stake in an NFL team. That's going to be a lovely little investment in my portfolio. I get that. What I'm going to tell you is that I believe the people that won the NBA rights, which are, the ESPN, Peacock, it's NBC, isn't it? And Amazon, they have bought a product that I believe is ending its product market fit. They have bought full games for mainly the regular season at a time when new audiences, especially for younger kids, don't give a flying fuck about a full game. And they certainly don't care about the regular season. Let's leave for aside that the standard of basketball these days, where everybody's throwing 3-pointers all over the place, isn't anywhere the way it used to be under Showtime Lakers or the Bulls. It just isn't. All this is what I would call granular micro due diligence. Whereas I believe this market is dominated by people that saying, look how well Adam Silver did at the NBA. Everybody was wanting to bid. He even got the deal away where, with Warner Brothers, where they actually got inside the NBA as a deal, and they did a little thing with highlights. Everything's rosy in the garden. I'm telling you, you may still have your white moose, but in terms of risk, I think there is a risk that you lose 10, 20%. And on the downside, there's a risk that you can drop 90. And in American sport, the people who will drop 90 are the media companies that invested in these rights. In Europe, the people that will drop 90 are the leagues, because the media companies have only got 3-4 year deals and they'll just not renew, like we saw in France Soccer League is a disaster. 55% of people who watched the games this weekend did it on piracy. I saw piracy kill my industry of the music industry. It's coming to sport. It's coming to sport, and everybody's saying it's an asset class where you can't lose. For me, it's delusional, Matt, Jason. For me, it's delusional.
But like related to that, though, I couldn't agree with you more. And like, I always think about this industry, films, everything is just like, they're late to the game of like piracy took over media first, right? And just like the media companies were trying to grab at the last straws and like trying to increase their profit margins, which killed them even faster. You see it in the film industry now. You see it like in sports. And then unfortunately, I couldn't agree with you more. It's like my favorite part of the Are You Not Entertained podcast is when you and Grant argue about this. And I'm unfortunately always on your side. Is like, you got to go to TikTok, you got to go to highlights. Like that's going to be the new model for like the youth generation. So I'm always like on your side pushing there with Grant's romanticism, even though I have
Jason,
idealistic romantic, but you know.
Well, we see this is probably my core point. Both of us are right in the sense that in any other industry in the world, whether it's the fashion industry, whether it's the motor car industry, you have different products for different segments of your audience. Now, guys of the age of Grant and I, we've probably got another 20 years of consumption in us. That's a nice cash cow business. So that should probably be kept as pure to Grant's wish as possible, because that's what we want. We don't want the Nickelodeon guy or Dora the Explorer saying push, push, push on an NFL broadcast. We don't want that. Let's be honest, guys. We don't want that. On the other side, you know, younger kids don't want to sit through 90 minutes. They won't do it. They want something to be happening. They want a whole lot of things to distract them. They want new formats like Kings League, like Ballers League, like all the kind of different things that are going on just now. The new stuff that's coming out with golf with what's it called, TFL or something like that. Can't remember the name. What does sport do just now? It tries to serve all of this spectrum of an audience with basically one product, and it's becoming neither fish nor fill and satisfying neither. The big challenge in sport is to have the courage and say, this is for the older cash cow audience, and we will milk that until they all die off. And over here, we'll play around a little bit. Just like that classic, was it the quadrant of Boston Consulting Group, you know, cash cow stars, the question mark. You know, like that. The problem is sport doesn't think like this. It never thinks like this. For 30 years since it's been really big money, all it's done is say, here is my rights tender, knock yourself out, guys. And because there's been a lot of bidders from the media sector, they've just given a lot of money in sport.
But like,
sport
really,
hasn't got the C-suite. Hasn't got the C-suite, Jason. Jay Monahan's getting $24 million a year, and he has presided over his organization being ripped apart. In what world is that normal? I'm sounding like Steve E. Smith now, but in what world is that normal? That you get a guy getting $24 million for seeing the organization he is assured of rip itself to pieces? In what world?
The boomer world. That's the world we're in. I was just ranting to my fiance this morning about these CEOs that make 10 to 20 million a year, where their stock's down 40% over the last few years. Like, it's just like, in what world? I don't understand it. But people, to me, it's more that luckiest generation of world history. Like, the boomers are holding on to it with their cold, dead hands. But like, there's a nuance there, though. I'm going to pull in that you used it. Like, by the way, Grant's lucky as shit. Like, he just happens to be, his Boyhood club is like the most gentleman club in the world with Fulham, right? So he can go on that milking.
Nobody gives a shit about Fulham. Nobody cares. Don't tell him this, but nobody cares.
But you could take
nobody. They win, they lose, they draw.
The Thames.
Nobody cares.
It's just the gentleman's club. And then, but like, to your point though, like, okay, here's the brass tacks though. I think we agree, but like, the nuance of these distressed assets though is you still have this bifurcation, right? You're going to either have these local clubs. You're going to have these leagues that entirely go away because nobody wants those sports anymore on streaming or whatever. But then you're still going to have those super leagues that probably take off because the people only then maybe care about the NFL and the EPL. So how do you get in a distressed position in there? Because those are not going to probably be distressed, right? Those are going to continue to take off. Like, do you want to buy the distressed assets of these shitty leagues that nobody cares about?
Well, let's what do you call it in America? Let's workshop this a little bit. Right. So you could buy teams in France just now, important teams like Marseille, Toulouse, maybe. In Italy, you could buy important teams like Juventus, like Roma, relatively cheaply now, and you are buying them on a convergence play. If you have a club like Newcastle, mid-level English club worth $500 million, and you can buy, I don't know, Lazio for 100 million, 200 million. The convergence play is that when things get shaken up after the Black Swan, there will be like sport is like Mother Nature. It will come back. There will be a reorganization of leagues. They will be called super leagues and then local national leagues. Some clubs that you bought really cheaply, let's call it Inter Milan, you bought really cheaply, will be re-rated overnight in a super league from what you bought it for say maybe 500 million, going up to 2 billion almost overnight. You just need to know where the dominoes are going to fall. So, similar thing with some of the big soccer clubs that are outside the big 5 leagues. The ones really with big names like Ajax, like my Celtic, like Benfica, like Fenerbahce in Turkey, like Anderlecht, like Feyenoord. All of them you can get for pennies. If there is anything that resembles closely a Super League, they are going to be worth more than a Brentford or a Brighton or a West Ham, things that are said to be worth 600, 700 million today. That's what I would call opportunistic long-term thing. Convergence play. In finance, that's what happened when the euro came around. You've all been there, guys. That's the kind of thing you say. The current structures of sport, especially in Europe, cannot hold for a zillion reasons. They're all in the book. For a zillion reasons. When they fall, what's happens the next day? There's a reorganization. Some assets will be valued the way they should be, not depending on the league they were in the day before the Black Swan. There's so many English clubs that are valued so highly because they're part of the richest league in the world. There's so many Italian clubs valued so poorly because they're in a league where the media rights are very low. That's a great opportunity if you know what you're doing and you've got patience.
But yeah, 3x price of the English rights versus the Serie A rights. But like, besides the Super League, does anything else close that delta on convergence? Like, is that your only bet is on a Super League?
Yeah.
And then
I'm a great believer in the markets. I'm a great believer in the power of the markets. Like-minded companies end up competing with each other. I believe that ultimately will come. The real skill for those that love sport is to work out the remainder that aren't in the Super League, the Plymouths. How do they thrive as a community asset and do for their local population the things I said earlier around about participation and bringing kids away from their mobile phones and all that? That's the real big win. But in terms of the financial side, who's not allowed in the big world of milk and honey today because they play in a small league like Holland or Belgium or Scotland? Who should be in a world? That's a convergence, but that's the only one I can see.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. Like, I think about it all the time. And as you know, like, and you've argued for, is like, the EPL was an original Super League. Like, Champions League was the original Super League. There's precedence for this to happen, and it's likely to happen the more sport becomes a bigger business overall. But, like, two other things I think about. One, how do you think about, though, like, do you think it changes, and can they ever actually make it stick? Thinking about, like, Liberty Media with F1 is, like, can they actually put a cap on salaries? Can they actually make this, I mean, what did it start as? Financial fair play, now it's PS, like, the names keep changing. But do you think they'll ever figure out a model across Europe where you can actually make the businesses a little bit more viable with some sort of caps on spending? Or do you think that's just...
You're saying like a franchise model inside of a Super League? Is that basically what you're saying?
No, well, closed leagues in general. You're right, Matt. You're right, Matt. You cannot have salary caps if you don't have a closed league, because if you change the membership of the league every year, there is way too much incentive for people to try everything to break the cap. Legally, illegally. I mean, we've seen it in Italy with fake gains from player sales and all that kind of stuff. We've seen all of that. As soon as you put a closed league there and you get a union deal with the players, game on. The problem with that is who gets into the league and who doesn't, because that's a question of luck and timing. If you, for whatever reason, are in a bad moment, the Chicago Bears just now, just to use an example, if there was a Super League somewhere that they wouldn't get in, but in the 80s and 90s they would have. It's the same with Nottingham Forest. In the 70s and 80s they would have been in a Super League. Everton the same, not today. So are you going to penalise people for just Leeds United? All of these things. And you know what? The answer is, don't make the ideal the enemy of the good. Somebody once told me that. The ideal don't make it the enemy of good progress. It's not going to be perfect, a Super League, closed leagues. Everybody's going to scream that it's desperately unfair, but it's better than the status quo. It's better than the status quo, because if you look at the numbers in European soccer, in every league, it's just a bloodbath. Truly a bloodbath. It's the same in rugby, the same thing. That's what you get when you have open leagues and you want to protect the glory of the what they call the meritocracy. There is no business model that works for that. And that's, I came to that peace in my soul a long time ago. I don't like it. I came to it and fine. I'm working on one in rugby now that, is some kind of attempt to save a sport that is going down the tubes. You have to think about these things, but I prefer to look at it as a land of opportunity. The status quo will not hold. Something new will come, and there's going to be blood on the streets, and that's when you make the best money.
People have to accept the bifurcation of those worlds, right? You have now these large conglomerates of the Super League, they become entertainment empires, right? They're the Disney and the Netflix of the future. And then you have local clubs, and you need to figure out how to make your match day, break even. So that's the way people have to think about that true bifurcation. But this leads me to my most important question for you, Raj, that I've been dying to ask you is as I'm looking into all this stuff, what I can't make sense of is I look at some of the best multi-club owners, all this stuff, and they're doing all this stuff on the pitch, but they're so focused on just everything's about, on the pitch, they're moneyballing it. They're doing all these other things. They're trying to get their media rights. They're trying to sell the stadium rights. They're doing all these things. But to me, they're all have blinders on and they're very myopic. To me, last week I was in New York City having a great conversation lunch with a phenomenal entrepreneur. And we were talking about the movie industry. It's what's the future of the film movie industry? How do you make this work? And we were talking about you have to get more creative about secondary, tertiary ideas, right? What is actually going to pay this film back? What's merchandise? What's some more other branding I can do outside of just the distribution? Because on streaming, it's going to be free. I'm not going to make my money back. And so what I can't figure out, and I don't know if this is illegal or not, because it's hard to find stuff online, so the best, is when you think about the club's revenue, and then maybe the new rules are 60 to 70% on player wages of that revenue, instead of just thinking about internally as this is an asset, now I have a global asset. So what are the tertiary brands I can do to attach to this global asset or this global entertainment empire? Do I buy a protein bar? Do I, buy Gatorade? Do I try to revamp Umbro? All the clubs, do I create a global brand that I can sell globally? And that increases my revenue and or behind the scenes, OTT app models where I'm showing the players, I have an entire media company that's showing them throughout the week, not the match day stuff, but behind the scenes. And maybe all of my socios or all my members pay, £10 a month for that. And then I can actually be making, $10, $20 million a month just off of this recurring monthly revenue. What I'm saying is to me, they're so myopic and they're not thinking about this as a true global brand. And can I just increase my revenue there in tertiary ways that allows me to spend that money on the pitch in a prudent manner?
Fanatics on steroids, right? You're talking about Fanatics blown up to a whole other level. And I know you have thoughts on that.
There you go, man. No, but there you go. You answered yourself. Somebody once said to me, there was this thing going around 3 or 4 years ago, which was, I would say, the blow off top in sport thinking. I think we've gone over the top now and we're just starting to come down. But let's say we were still a little bit before the very zenith. And the line was this: Man United apparently have got 1.1 billion users, fans. Call it fans, users. Their valuation is whatever it is, 4 billion. You do the maths and you can see what the value per fan, per user is for Man United. You compare that with a Pinterest or a Snapchat, which was significantly higher. So the thinking was football clubs, soccer clubs are vastly undervalued on the per user basis, and how do they unlock that value? And all the things that Jason just said were flavour of the month. None of that has come to fruition for a lot of different reasons. Again, everybody listening to this needs to remember that American sport is organised different to European sport. Your business model is different. You've got built-in marginality and you've got closed leagues. We don't. So we are competing every season for our survival. And if we don't do it, we go down into the winter wastelands of relegation and lower leagues. And that means that people overspend to protect their position. To do that, you need money up front. You need money up front so that you can budget the biggest player roster that you can afford. Leagues then have to work for these clubs, and they too think about money up front in TV rights, in sponsorship, and in licensing. All the things that you're talking about here, Jason, what is called in the P&L account, income statement, other in football club accounts. They don't do any long-term thinking that you're talking about there. They basically go around and say, who will give me a minimum guarantee? It's the minimum guarantee culture that leaves most of the money on the table for sport-adjacent companies like Fanatics. And sadly, that's why for me the whole thing is linked. If you don't have closed leagues, your clubs are obliged to overspend. They will overspend. They will demand that their leagues give them more and more money up front today. The leagues will react to that, sell too many games. They'll lose the principle of scarcity, and they will take every deal under the sun from any Tom, Dick, or Harry that will put a check down. They won't understand the rights that they're selling. Somebody smart over there will, and will pay 50 for something that will be worth 350 in 2 years' time. That's the history of sport. We've always given our best champagne to other people. Firstly, broadcasters, then social media, now people like Fanatics. That's the way it's always been. There isn't the mentality to say, let's have a 10-year plan where, we'll grow over time. They won't let you do that. Fans won't let you do that. As you said, you lose two games in a row, you're in trouble. Fans don't want to hear about a 10-year plan. You're in trouble if you lose 2 games in a row. And the second reason is your competitor is spending like there's no tomorrow because he doesn't want to get relegated and he wants you to get relegated and he's competing for your players. It's set up to fail. And everybody says it's the glory of European sport. Maybe, but the glory's leading us to the poorhouse. And that's the story of European sport.
You just
beautifully said.
Yeah, Matt and I have been texting about this the last few days. So you pulled on multiple strings. I was texting him. I cannot believe they're calling for Pep Guardiola to be sacked after 7 games. That is unreal to me that fans would be calling for Pep. He's won 6 Premier League titles in 8 years for Man City, but also as we know, it's more because they spend more on players. We're never actually going to know if Pep's a good coach, right? He spent the most on players at Man City, at Borussia Dortmund, and at Barcelona. Sorry, not Borussia, Bayern Munich. And so it's we'll never know if he's good. And then the other one, can you explain to Matt and I, because I really can't understand this. How do people think Man United is this massive club and will always be this massive club? Everything waxes and wanes. You brought up earlier, back in the day, Nottingham Forest, Leeds United, Aston Villa were major clubs, right? Man United had the great 90s run, and now it's Man City, but everybody's still holding on to the nostalgia of the 90s. Why is this still a huge club?
Well, the answer is what you said, that nostalgia of the 90s. It's not the nostalgia of the 90s. It's the nostalgia of 1958 and the Munich air tragedy that wiped out what was potentially the greatest European team of all time. If that plane doesn't go down, the story of World Cups and European Cups, which is now called the Champions League, is significantly different. By the way, there was only 4 players survived that crash. 1, 9, 5, and 8. The crash was in 1958. It's really spooky. It's really one of them, of course, is number 9, Bobby Charlton. So what I'm saying is Man United's brand authority, to use that kind of word that they like in marketing, comes from having their team destroyed entirely in a plane crash. Sir Matt Busby then building a new team with George Best, one of the greats of all time, Dennis Law, probably the greatest ever Scottish player, and Bobby Charlton, to win the European Cup in 1968. And that cemented their glory. You are right, Jason. In the 70s and in the 80s, Man United lost their way a little bit, but they remained the biggest club I believe because of Munich. So when they get Ferguson, who puts 20 years on the almanacs of success. You've built on what was already there. That's why in our part of the world, Man City, who people will say is now the big brand and isn't it wonderful and all this kind of stuff, it's not a club, not a proper club. For us, for my generation, it's not a proper club in the sense that it's a good club. It was always the second club in Manchester. They went around about their business with dignity. They went down 3 or 4 leagues. They always kept their hardcore. But the financial doping that they've had with Abu Dhabi doesn't come close to touching the glory of Man United and Munich and all
But
of
it's
that.
an old person's
And
perspective, because a 20-year-old doesn't give a shit. A 20-year-old thinks Man City's the big.
I know, you're right. I know.
And they're going to think that for the rest of their life.
I don't mind. I believe that, it's important. Sport, the only thing we've got different from entertainment, different from WWE, everything like that, is our memory of history. Our memory of Terry Bradshaw and all the things he did, of Vince Lombardi, I believe that without that, our ultimate destiny is WWE. Are we more entertaining this week than we were last week? Whilst we can, as an industry, say, is Tiger Woods better than Jack Nicklaus? We have got some flagpoles from which to speak to our children. We can educate them on a product that isn't just about Squid Games or the latest Grand Theft Auto. We are saying this guy here maybe is the best there's ever been. Oh, really, Dad? What do you mean by that? Well, Messi may be better than Maradona. Maybe. And you've got a conversation. And I think that's the glory of our product. And here I sound like Grant Williams. But I genuinely believe that without the history of knowing, who the Steelers are, who the Packers are, and everything like that, you are competing every day to see if you're more interesting for a kid than something they can watch on YouTube. And we've got to be better than that. Otherwise, we'll die. The history is the only thing that's different. And that's the fan loyalty bit as well.
So if you're channeling your inner
that's
Grant Williams, if you're channeling your inner Grant Williams, I'll channel my inner Raj Mitchell. Is like, I think we're all just entertaining each other in this postmodern philosophical society. So that's what it is. And then the whole GOAT debate is primarily just driven on your age cohort, right? Like my generation's going to argue that Michael Jordan's the greatest of all time. And then somebody younger is going to say that it was Kobe, and then somebody younger than that's going to say it's LeBron. And all you're really telling me is how old you are.
Yes, I don't deny that. I mean, I don't want to go into the specifics and throw certain things at you, but I don't deny it is about your age. But what I'm saying is that conversation in itself sets us different from all the other entertainment. I truly believe that. Otherwise, sport isn't different. And then if we have to compete head to head with everything that's out there on gaming, on YouTube, and we will lose. We will lose. The viewing hours already show we're losing. All we've got as a USP, as a competitive advantage, is the glory of our history. And it's our duty to tell the kids, listen, LeBron can't lace Jordan's boots. You know that, don't you? Seriously, I'm going to tell you. You know that, don't you? 6 finals he was in. How many did he lose? How many did he lose? None. The answer is none. And like then you get a reaction, and then everything is put into context. That's what I believe. So yeah, that's the difficulty for me, because I know you're right, Jason. That's where the world is going, but I don't want the world to go that way, and I want to stop it, because, as Grant says, going that way ends up with Jake Paul and Mike Tyson. And whilst that may make the numbers work for Netflix, whilst that may give them a beachhead to make further investment into sport and work for all kinds of reasons, we all know that Mike Tyson does not deserve that and is not the person you saw there. And we have to hold on to that, I believe.
But I believe, like, sorry, Matt, I've completely hijacked this whole thing. But like I have, sorry, I'm speaking too much. and
You were
it's
both
waxes
really
and wanes.
hijackers. Let's be honest. Keep going.
Waxes and waning of like the pendulum's always swinging back and forth. Like I'm always shocked now, like talking to younger entrepreneurs, even in like defense tech industry and everything. They're really conservative, right? Like just like politically everything and societally. So like it just changes. And to quote like the British philosopher John Gray is like we oscillate between liberalism and barbarism. So I do believe because of that history, like you're saying, that soccer has or sport has, that's what's going to maybe swing back in the other direction, maybe away from like this Jake Paul, Mike Tyson. Like, so you just never know like what is going to be the catalyst for that. And it's just kind of the waxing and waning of culture, I think, in general. But that's my take on it. Like you're not going to really see it, but also to like take it away from soccer a second. I'm really curious of your take on this because it's just happened in the last week with Cadillac becoming like the 11th team in F1. And I remember like even pre-Drive to Survive, like I was looking at F1 teams, right? You could usually buy them for valuations of maybe 150 to 300 million euros, let's call it, or you could buy a team for €1 but take on their debts. And now with valuations getting in that 1 to 3 billion range, I would still argue they're dramatically underpriced from their reach and having a closed league system of now only 11 teams and 22 drivers. Like, what's your take on valuations there? Is that
you answered half the question yourself? The relatively closed leagues, if you want to use that analogy. But most importantly, they brought in budget caps. If you bring in a budget cap, cost control into sport, you have got a lovely business because your customer loyalty is off the charts. That's the only thing you need to do as a business person in sport. How do I control cost to keep the cost of the athlete, the talent, no more than 50%? American sport got that sorted ages ago. That's why you're golden. You're golden. We don't. Formula One has done it in the last couple of years, and that's the difference. That's the difference, And
it's called what it is. It's a cartel.
It's a cartel.
It's a great business model.
Cartel.
And it's a cartel teed up.
Business model. Listen, if the unions
That's the
are happy
definition,
with
right?
it, yeah, it's a cartel. I don't mind that. Who cares
And
about
great
cartel?
for this. Yeah, but it's great for this world. Like this is the, in the 90s, like playing NBA Jam and being like, I see your Scottie Pippen. I will play Darth Vader against him. I can swap anything in I want. I can make my own story and narrative. The cartel of F1 there's so many angles they can turn around and market that to a consumer base.
Yes, they can. Of course, I'm slightly biased sitting here in Italy that you can call it whatever way you want, but there's Ferrari and there's the rest. Like everybody else is making up the grid. Like Alzheimer's.
The tifosi. As Roger's been alluding to, that I think Americans don't realize, and this is maybe going back to Matt, your question about understanding the local nature of a club or whatever you're investing in, is, for the land of the entrepreneur and capitalism that America is, we've created cartels, closed league systems that are socialist, right? It's just the irony of like, and then Europe doing the opposite. It's like, it's just this broad
irony of the capitalism
sports.
here.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. We have
that's the main insight of the book. When I wrote that chapter, I thought this is beautiful. The land of the free is communist, redistributive, where they reward the loser. They reward the schmuck who finishes last, gets the first draft pick. When did this slip through? Did nobody think it's not really our thing in America to reward the schmuck? And we're the opposite. We are tearing ourselves apart. Socialist Europe tears itself apart. I think that's beautiful. Once you see that, you cannot unsee that. It's an amazing thing.
I've got some notes.
Please.
I know I've lost control of this conversation. Yeah. I'm going to finally interject and just go. We're dragging this out. You are encouraged to freely interrupt in these comments because I know you're both going to have thoughts on this. I loved, we started talking at the beginning and you were talking about soccer rides, but I can't help but think, just a quote about life. Life as a process I couldn't stop. If there's one thing to remember in every investment thesis, it's once it started, you don't have control. It just has to run. You just have to take the ride.
I agree, completely agree. And if you don't, you'll regret it. Like my life has been about what I would call, in Jason's world, relatively high risk, acceptance of higher risk. I moved to a new country when I was young. I came back to Como when I didn't know how I was going to make any money with my wife. Music industry, a lot of strange things. My CV isn't normal. But I am so glad now, because as you get to my age, you think, okay, there's only X amount of years left on average. And, if I hadn't done all these things, I'd be freaking out now. But I've got a relative level of contentment, because I started the snowball and I didn't know where it was going to go, but it went. And if you've belief in yourself, whatever way it goes, I'll work it out. The Americans love that phrase, I'll work it out. I love that.
It's a beautiful sentiment. It's a beautiful part of your journey, is just how careening this path is from music to sport and everything between. And another one that and Jason, you'll relate to this too. These are two things that people don't often relate: business, sports, and music, all in one thing, all in one career path with all these common features. It's a beautiful thing to talk about these stories. What were you gonna say, Jason?
I know what Matt's saying too is he's jealous of your career path, but also Matt is subtweeting me with that question, is that, like you're saying, I have an unusual CV as well that's very circuitous, and we love to tell these linear stories in hindsight and narratives, but I just don't believe in free will, and it's just like, this has been an amazing ride. It's like being on a roller coaster where you have a plastic steering wheel, thinking you're driving the course, and maybe when we're younger and are full of testosterone, we think we're pushing that snowball downhill, and then as we get older, we realize, wow, I don't know how I got here, but I'm just going to enjoy this ride and enjoy the scenery as it goes by.
It's a fantastic thing. Jason, I want to take it to something that you said. You're talking about the restaurant business. You're pointing out how you're only as good as your last dish. Greatness, it comes from the service model, the nourishment, and the collective careerism that becomes the reality. Anytime you build that community asset, you're also creating these new ladders for career pathing and whatever else. And I think there's this fascinating idea about, even if you want to build something that's anti-scaling as a business model, like you have the scaling HR function to go buy 6 clubs or open up 10 restaurants or whatever else. There's something about this choosing to scale different parts of the business, maybe not just the one sole core of the business. I'm so fascinated. Tell me what you think of that, Jason. And Raj, I need you to tell me about this too.
It's so good in two ways. One, I've read hundreds of business books. I hate all of them because it's all idiosyncratic and nobody can tell you how to run a business, right? But one of my favorites by far has always been Small Giants. And it's about literally companies by Bill Burlingham, about companies that want to stay small for small sake. They didn't go for growth's sake, right? But as Roger would point out, that takes an incredible amount of courage and an incredible amount of standing alone. And so related to the restaurants, I find interesting, like you're saying, is success as a restaurant becomes an albatross, as now you have to build more restaurants, like you're saying, for the HR function. But also I would argue that promotion through the EFL is an albatross around your neck. And so it would take a very unusual person to realize that what others would deem as success is most likely going to lead to financial failure. And so it would take a very unusual idiosyncratic person to fight against that tide.
What do you think, Raj, about that? About just understanding what you're scaling in the model, because you don't need to lift all boats. You can grow different things.
Well, listen, I could talk a lot about this for a long time, and probably none of it is relatively relevant. Well, a couple of things I'd say to you. The idea that we talked a little bit a second ago about cartels and monopoly and oligopoly, all this kind of stuff. One of the great tragedies is that business tends towards monopoly by buying your competitors. I look around now today, I think it's the same in America, it's certainly the same in the UK, Italy slightly different. Every town looks exactly the same, with the same high streets, with the same shops on it. Is that really what we wanted when we thought it was great for Amazon to dominate everything? That every little hardware store, every little haberdashery store, deli, is put out a bookstore, is put out of business on the altar of efficiency and cheapness. At the time, we thought it was great because everything was coming down in price. Now we are left with a homogeneous, incredibly dull society and retail outlet. I could almost say the same for the restaurant trade almost. The second thing I would say, which is linked to this, but it's on the cost line, not on the top line, The greatest business opportunity anywhere in the world today is in customer service. You know the strap line, you will speak to a human within 30 seconds. I think if you do that, you can dominate because people will pay for that. People will, and I think they'll pay a lot for it. If you just set yourself out in any industry and say, you will speak to a human, they will say, how much does it cost? And they will say, fine. Because we all know the dramatic tragedy of automated bot-led customer service now is horrendous. And somebody somewhere is going to be saying, it works fine. We've made all these cost savings. We outsourced it first to India now. It's all AI and everything like that. The older generation especially, but not just them, but especially them, by the way, they're the ones with money, the boomer ones who run away with the cold dead hands, they want to speak to a human. They want to speak to a human and they'll pay for it. All you have to do is set yourself up and create a brand that says you will speak to a human, and I think you've got $1 billion business there. And that's what my answer to about global versus local. The pendulum, I think, will swing back. We still have got a lot of very peculiar stores in Italy because that's Italy, everything like that. UK hasn't got that anymore, and it's tragic, absolutely tragic. And anytime you see that there's a gap in the market, I think there is a gap for somebody going into a hardware store and shooting the breeze about how they want to set up their wiring or what nail they should use for this. Human interaction again, that's what I'm bullish on. Sorry,
Matt, two quick things on that, Matt, with Raj. I couldn't agree more. Is like, I always think about like I tell, I think even like older people, retired people that now are empty nesters, they actually would be great at e-commerce, even though they're scared of it because it swings back the other way because it's still main street or high street business tactics, right? Like just customer service, right? And that's what differentiates you now is that in this age, every business is commodity. So how do you set yourself apart with branding? Like you're saying, it's customer service and all these other things. And that's how you can actually make a profit margin on a commodity business is through customer service and branding. So I couldn't agree more with Raj. And then Matt, I know you love analogies, and I think about what I was saying earlier about this promotion and albatross is like, we inevitably end up building golden cages around ourselves. And the one I think about it often is we have a family friend that is a producer at Pixar, but he started off as an animator and he had a deep love for animation at Pixar, right? But then he starts getting promoted, right? Then he buys a house in a Bay Area. He has a family. He gets promoted. Now he's like managing people and shuffling papers around. And all he wants to do is going back to being an animator. But the salary base for that is too low. Like, so we just build, like, we should be fearful of all of our dreams coming true in a way.
It's scaling the wrong function again. And Raj, you'll appreciate this. I mean, we all know SaaS, we know software as a startup and all those fun little acronyms. My favorite one that I preach all the time at my job is I call it WINNAs. And you got to say it that way with a little Boston inflection. And it's well, I'm not AI as a service model. And I think if you just lean into that, there's so much ground to be captured.
I think that's right. I think that's right.
We talked about, and I have to point this out too, this has been an eye-opener that, Jason, you'll probably relate to, but my wife and I moving back to Pennsylvania where we are, I'm amazed. And this is thinking about the MLS toehold that just can't ever seem to catch. You've got all these houses that will hang these flags that will be like all the Philly sports teams. And it amazes me because different houses have different versions of these flags and which teams they leave off. And it's so indicative of where the stranglehold is on sports through the old media legacy assets. Because you almost always have the Eagles, you almost always have the Phillies, but then it's a toss-up between if you have the Flyers or the 76ers. And I feel like I could walk the dog past these houses and tell you so much about the demographics inside that house based on who's left off. And then the one token neighborhood down the street. Shout out to my buddy, Chris, who's been on this podcast too. Chris with his little tiny Union flag that he has and is the one house in the neighborhood repping for it. It's so hard. We talked about, oh man, the regional arbitrage between calling it a CAGR, the accent on the CAGR versus CAGR. At least 6 people in the finance community are going to love that one. I love this talk about piracy and what it did to the music streaming and just what it's doing to sport and what's doing for everything else. Piracy is always a question of scarcity. If you take the thing and you take away the access, that's what makes it scarce. You have to walk away from that and look at where's the scarcity, where's the bottleneck on the other things. And speaking of bottlenecks, I have found a bottleneck I want to make this image. I want to get it on a shirt for you, Jason. I want a moose, and I want it behind a counter.
White moose.
And I want no Super League for you on that moose counter. On that
By the way, I mean, maybe you guys know this, but mooses are huge. I mean, like, it's some popular misconception that they're like little horses. They're like dragons.
The moose-related deaths.
Who's the such? Like, you guys, somebody from Europe that wanders some forest in Canada, and they come up against a moose.
Canadian Game of Thrones is going to be huge.
Yeah. I mean, like, all of these things, all these quirky things, I think we miss out so much of this stuff in this commoditized scaling world now. We do. Long on humanity, long on quirkiness. Even Winona Ryder's coming back into fashion. These things are all signals. Guys, these things are all signals.
They are signals. Other signals that I noted are apologies to Grant Williams and his beloved Fulham. I'm sure Clint Dempsey still cares. Here's to all hope and it was all hope and few citations. Fantastic. I want to give a shout out to my pup of rest his soul, but my grandparents last year, they couldn't figure out how to get to the network television broadcast of the Super Bowl. I found out we were invited to a Super Bowl party across the street. So we walked across the street to say hi to my beloved grandparents and find them watching the SpongeBob Super Bowl on Nickelodeon. So confused by the little bubbles and everything. So confused. Absolutely amazing. I love talking about the convergence plays, the like competing against like, the importance of that. And no matter what business you're in, knowing that you have a positioning strategy to compete against like, and then a depositioning strategy against how you push that like thing out of the conversation, out of the equation. Such a capitalist idea. And finally, I got to end with this. Raj, you were talking about don't make ideal the enemy of good. It makes me think of this, what we've just been talking about, the multiple scarcities, the whole idea that there's just multiple paths to finding your way through. You can't be scared of it. And you got to know your fans in each of those subcategories. Because if you know your fans, plural, then you can start to understand that greatness is just this price you pay. And all that follows is what you're going to invest in with all those different fan groups to get you there. This whole thing's probably falling apart. But that means this land is your land. This land is my land. It's a land of opportunity, a land of communal thinking in a global world. Man, I am the very grateful schmuck in this conversation. I'm so happy.
I mean, listen, you're mentioning, I like all your little things about, that's Woody Guthrie, right? This land.
That's Woody Guthrie. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about Woody Guthrie. He inspires classically Bruce Springsteen, right? Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah, goes to visit him and everything.
What the hell happened to Bruce Springsteen? This guy. Like, whether it was true or not, I don't really believe, and they use the whole New Jersey, the river guy.
Fulham, really the New Jersey.
But he's certainly left it now. He's full of Botox and he's doing these car commercials and things like that.
It's very shiny.
That's what happens when you screw around with brand. You've got to be careful. I'll end with a funny story. This is funny. And it's not in the book, and I don't think I've even noticed it. So the thing about the music industry and sport and all the things we're talking about is it is full of just beautiful irrationality. It's the opposite of German efficiency and predictability and all of that. It's the opposite. Every day is a new day. Somebody's going to fumble a ball when he's just about to go. It's just, you never know. So I was in the music business, and as I say, we were in Italy, and Rome was one of our offices, and one of our major artists was in Rome. So often we had to go down, and the thing is, there you go to a concert, and concert would finish, and after the meet and greet at the end, you'd be 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. And because we were who we were a music company, and we were quite well introduced and everything like that, we could call up restaurants and say, open, we're coming, we've got the artists, we've got everything like that. So this happened one day. We went to this very famous restaurant. It's La Matriciana. It's called, really old-fashioned Roman cooking. And I'm there, and big table, all of us from the company, most of them Roman guys, a couple of artists there as well. This guy comes in, and he is greeted very warmly by the community. You know what the Italian way, a guy come in, everybody's hugging, the kisses both sides, everything like that. So me as the kind of like naive foreigner, and I played that role very, very willingly, and it allowed the Romans to express themselves beautifully, as they did in this occasion. So I said, "Who is this guy? Seems very popular." And the person beside me casually just said, "That's the lover of Pope Paul VI." And as you are now saying, I looked around in total shock at this table who had heard this comment, and every single one of them just nodded their head as if, "You mean you don't know?" You know? And like, whether it's true or not, I don't know. But it's very important. The point is, those are the experiences you get in these industries. And the funny thing is that some people just think it's normal. You think the world has ended, and somebody says, "Yeah, it's just the way it is in sport or in music or in something like that." A zillion stories like that. That's my patrimony. That's my legacy to myself. That's what's not in the CV, but that's what's in my memory. All stories like that.
I love it because that's basically the premise of this entire podcast. This is looking for those stories.
By the way, look it up. What's Pope?
I'm going to now. That's
Matt, this is just
can't wait for those Google searches to follow me around.
You've not had that on.
Mic drop.
Raj,
we could go out and loads like that, but you better not get me started because it won't stop. It won't stop.
We'll do a follow-up.
What I just heard from Raj is that's an open invitation, Matt, for when we're in Lake Como. We're going out for some great wine.
Oh, we are
on the lake, and you can tell stories till we all pass out. And Matt's gonna just eat it all up because he loves music so much in the music industry.
We're coming for the lake for all those stories now. Brought this on yourself.
There's nothing more interesting than music artists. Seriously, the artists and the comedians are the ones that see these things earlier. For some reason, they see things earlier. Sports stars don't, but artists and comedians do. And I've had the fortune to hang out with them, and some of them become my friends. And I mean, as you can see in the book, I'm pretty friendly with Jim Kerr of Simple Minds. Same town, but both pretty much ages, same football team, both Catholic, everything like that. We have WhatsApp exchanges. Because the thing with an artist is that I've found this, because you have to be like this, they are not linear in their interaction, right? Sometimes they don't want to speak. And you have to be EQ enough to know it's not on, right? And sometimes they just vomit out a stream of consciousness, right? And like, it happens not every day, but regularly. And, I send him, or before I even get a chance to send it, he reads my Sunday columns. And I am not kidding you. My ego is big enough, but I'm not kidding you. In 10 seconds, he comes up with a line that is better than anything that is in that column. Just like that. And I said, where the f did you get that from? I spent a week doing that column and you just come up with that line? It's unbelievable stuff. Unbelievable what they see. Different breed, guys. Different breed. Anyway.
Raj, tell the good people if they want to follow along, if they want to read that Sunday column, where can they connect and follow with you on the internet?
Well, in Twitter, you can follow me at RPM Como. That's as in the lake, not like Cornwall. Some people think that's what I'm saying. RPM Como as in Lake Como. My company is called Albacara. It's albacara.net is the website where all the articles and all the podcasts are there, as well as everything that we do in our day job. There is a Substack. I don't know where the address of that is, but you can find it somewhere about where you get automatically all the columns come to you every Sunday. But yeah, LinkedIn, you can find me. I'll speak to anybody.
Buy the book, get a copy.
Thank you, both of you.
Jason, what about you? Where can they find you? You have any last second papal stories you want to drop on this conversation?
No, I will. I'll actually plug for Raj. The book is amazing. Also, I love if you go to the Alba Chiara. Is it .net or .com? .net, right?
Yeah, done it.
I love the animations and the design. Like we're all lovers of design.
So
like
cool.
The sketches and everything.
So
everything
Jacobo.
Great.
Yeah, it's great. It's great design work.
You know that he used to be a football hooligan in his earlier
really?
days. He was an ultra. This guy is a classic artist. I mean, like he's away with the fairies, hippie, everything like that. He's also very moody. You know, like when I say to him, the article's going to be about this week. It's going to be about Stanley Kubrick, Eyes Wide Shut, and you know he'll come back with the first draft. And if I say I don't like it, often he'll freak out because like they're moody. Artists are moody. You know, I say like work with me, Jacobo, work with me. You know, like that kind of. He is. Everybody loves him. The nicest guy in the world. Independently, he's on LinkedIn. Reach out, speak to him. He's just a lovely guy.
Yeah, wonderful work. And get the book so you can read the story about the boats in the fiction.
But like the hooligans, I want to bring back like the mods and the casuals, bring the fashion back, like FC Venezia to the game. Like let's create the full culture around it. You can find me on Twitter X at Jason C. Buck, and at mutinyfund.com is where we talk about all these fun things and podcasts like this.
Like, follow, subscribe, all the things. You're watching Just Press Record on the Cultish Creative YouTube channel, and we are out.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Like, comment, and hey, subscribe below. The Cultish Creative on YouTube if you haven't already. As the good compliance people want me to remind you, Matt Zeigler, that's me, is a managing director at Sunpoint Investments. The opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Sunpoint Investments. No information on this podcast should be construed as investment advice. Securities discussed in the podcast may be holdings of clients of Sunpoint Investments. I hope you've been entertained. I hope you found this useful. I hope you talk to a professional before you try any of this stuff at home. And most of all, I hope you've subscribed. Be nice to each other out there. And don't forget, head over to cultishcreative.com and let's make curiosity a habit together. And I'm out.